Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Penn State 365 podcast. My name is Dylan Callan, Crowley beat writer and recruit analyst at Happy Valley Insider, covering Penn State football and athletics on the Rivals Network. I'm joined by my co-hosts today on the PSU 365 podcast, Marty Leap, also of Happy Valley Insider, as well as our resident superfan, Anthony Azan, coming back here today on Sunday evening to recap Penn State's 30-13 win over the Illinois Fighting Illini on Saturday afternoon in Champaign. Gentlemen, before we get into that, I do want to quickly just give a little mention, sending our thoughts and prayers to the Jersey Shore community after Max Engel, a player for Jersey Shore, passed away this week. Max collapsed at the end of a football game 2 weeks ago. And passed away this week. I know a couple of players and the community there at Jersey Shore just feel terrible for that community and the Jersey Shore football program. They'll actually be back on the field Monday in a game after having to cancel the game on Friday, which I think was, I forget who they're going to play, but they're going to be back on the field Monday for the first time since Max's passing. So our thoughts and prayers go out to the Jersey Shore community on that, and we'll certainly be rooting for them the rest of the way. But Penn State, Illinois, guys, it wasn't pretty, but Penn State did get the job done, 30-13, as I mentioned. It was an ugly first half for Penn State. I believe going into halftime was 16-7. But there's a lot to discuss in this game. The offense had its ups and downs. The defense, for the most part, was solid. Had a few drives where I'm sure they'd like some plays back, but an overall quality performance. But at the end of the day, a win is a win, and Penn State's now 3-0 in the season. And moving on to the White Out week against Iowa this weekend, which we'll talk about as well in this episode. But as we begin talking Penn State, Illinois here, Anthony, I'll start with you. Just what's your initial takeaways from the Nittany Lions win in Champaign, and then how do you feel personally coming out of this one?
I mean, I feel really good about the secondary coming out of this game.
Yeah.
I mean, 4 interceptions total on Luke Altmaier. I mean, and they were all beauties too. Great coverage on each of them.
Worth noting, one of the interceptions was Abdul Carter, but the other 3 were all DBs.
That's true. But,
secondary.
You know, the secondary looked spectacular. The linebackers showed up today. They looked great. Just a great all-around performance by the defense. The offense has some things to clean up. Some missed opportunities was the story of the day, and very undisciplined. A lot of penalties. Some of them were back-breaking. Almost flipped the momentum of the game on one of them, especially the one from KLS. Yep. So, yeah, Penn State, inconsistent on offense, left a lot of points on the board. Definitely have some things to clean up going into next week.
Absolutely. I'm going to actually, for our viewers on YouTube, going to put up the stats for this game from Penn State's side. But Marty, what are your initial thoughts coming out of this one?
Yeah, anytime you go on the road in Big Ten play and you win a game by 17 points, especially a game where it really wasn't that close and, up until a garbage time touchdown late in the game, you'd held the opponent to single digits. You're going to take it, but definitely some, I don't know if it's necessarily concerning, but definitely frustrating things because this game shouldn't have been this close. The turnovers that Penn State couldn't capitalize on, dumb penalties, like you said, Anthony, especially on by Keandre Lambert-Smith. If Lambert-Smith doesn't get called for that unsportsmanlike conduct, I mean, Penn State was on their way to make that thing 20-0 late in the second quarter. We set it off here before we started, but if Lambert-Smith doesn't commit that penalty, this thing probably winds up like 42-6 or something like that. But he commits a penalty, field goal gets blocked, Illinois scores, they have all the momentum. But, yeah, so a game, a lot of frustration, a lot to learn from for a young team, especially Drew Allar in the offense. But, man, tip your cap to Manny Diaz in this defense. They were swarming. They were all over the field. They made Altmaier, who's not a bad quarterback, look awful. And, there's a lot of unrest early in this game on Penn State Twitter about that rush defense. At the end of the day, Illinois averaged 2.1 yards per carry, and it wasn't due to a lack of trying. I think they ran the ball like 40 times, averaged 2.1 yards per carry. It was nice to have Kazai Izzard back, but just tip of the cap of that defense. What a great game by Manny Diaz and his unit.
Yeah, I absolutely agree about the defense. I mean, the final stats may not tell you how strong this defense actually played. They allowed 354 total yards in the game, but just 62 rushing yards in the game kept Illinois to 2.1 yards per rush. They had 5 turnovers, the 4 interceptions, plus 1 forced fumble from Dominic DeLuca, 3 sacks, 7 tackles for a loss. Just all around a great day for the Penn State defense. People look at the 269 passing yards by Illinois, but there was a nice chunk of those that came in the fourth quarter once the second team defense and the backups were mostly playing. So that'll be definitely, things that Penn State wants to clean up for when those guys do play. But I think coming away with the start in defense, that start in secondary, you have to continue to feel good about it. Once again, Penn State may have the best secondary in all of college football based off what we saw coming in, last season, coming into this season, and through 3 weeks of action already. I guess let's start talking about Drew's performance here. 16 for 33, 208. I saw 48% completion percentage, 101.4 quarterback rating. It was the worst of his 3 games on paper, of his first 3 starts, I should say. It wasn't a great performance, there's no doubt about that, but I think it's a performance in which he probably performed better than the numbers indicated. Illinois was getting a lot of pressure on Drew throughout the afternoon. He didn't get to settle in the pocket much. Penn State's wide receiver room had a really rough day. He was the victim of a few drops, the victim of bad route running throughout. He had a lot of things not going his way in this game. Now, there was a lot of things he has to clean up himself. Marty, you had a good quote, I think, in your position grades today about how this is a tape where he's going to be able to correct a lot of things, but then afterwards he's going to want to bury the tape, burn it, and never look at it again. Because there was a lot of things he did miss on Saturday. There was open wide receivers he missed. There were some throws he would like back. But out of his struggles on Saturday, I don't think coming out of it that there's any that are really of major concern. I think more of them probably stem from, one, the Illinois pass rush being just tremendous throughout that first half. The wide receiver room struggling without Harrison Wallace. But also, this Illinois defense was throwing some pretty complicated looks at Drew for somebody just making his 3rd start, his first road start. So, I mean, the stats aren't pretty, but I'm not sure this is one that Penn State fans should be coming out concerned about Drew's level of play against Illinois and then worrying that it's going to be a sign of things to come in the rest of Big Ten play. Marty, I'll start with you here. Just what were your thoughts on Drew's play today, on Saturday?
Yeah, I said it on Twitter during the game. I said it in my position grades right up. This is a film. This film is one Drew Allar is going to learn a lot from. He's going to burn it and never watch it again. He didn't get a lot of help. The pass protection was not great. Johnny Newton played like a freaking man possessed for Illinois.
Yeah.
There was 3 drops, 3 or 4 balls batted down at the line of scrimmage.
Yep.
The wide receivers had their worst game of the year. There was another play where he threw an absolute dart to split 2 defenders for Dante Cephas.
Yeah.
Cephas fell coming out of his break, or else that would have been a big gain.
Yep.
But on the flip side, there was the throw there with the drops. Also, the one Katron Allen dropped in the end zone on just an incredible throw by Drew Allar, lofted in there. But again, on the flip side, there was the throw to Theo Johnson. We had Theo 4 touchdown and overthrew him. There was multiple times Nick Singleton was getting matched up on linebackers or was not covered at all, and Drew didn't see him, didn't throw him the ball. There was a play, I think in the second quarter, I want to say first or second quarter, where Drew rolled out to his right, had Keandre Lambert-Smith wide open, like no one within 10, 15 yards.
Yeah, down the seam, I believe.
Would have walked into the end zone, and he just never saw him, took off and ran. So, but like you said, Illinois threw a lot of things at him exotically with the defense. This Illinois defensive line is one of the best in the Big Ten. We talked about it beforehand. Newton might be the best defensive lineman they play all year. So there's still a lot there to go with that, but a great learning experience for him. And but one thing I did really like is through it all, through his struggles in this game, he didn't turn it over. There was
Yep.
no super dumb throws, no big mistakes. And again, if you don't that opening drive of Malik McClain doesn't drop that pass for an easy first down, offense might get in a rhythm, and who knows what happens. Same thing starts second half. McClain doesn't drop it. Offense might get in a rhythm. You don't know where it goes. So a lot to learn from here from Drew, but first career road start in conference play. He did not play well. He got no help, and they still won by 17. You're going to take that.
And before I hand it off to Anthony, I think it's also worth noting here that this type of defense and performance may have come at a great time for Penn State because, I mean, Iowa this upcoming week, Phil Parker is one of the best defensive minds in all of college football. You know damn well that he's going to throw complex looks at Drew in that game as well, trying to get him off his game. And they're going to try to confuse a young quarterback in a huge primetime situation. So I think with this timing of this Illinois game, it could work out very well for Penn State. I wouldn't be surprised if Drew comes out next week and has a much better performance against a much better Iowa defense, at least compared to Illinois. But Anthony, what's your thoughts on Drew's performance on Saturday against Illinois, and do you have any concerns about him going forward in this Big Ten schedule?
No, not really. I think, we talked about it before we came on, but he was just a young quarterback making his first road start against a really good defensive line, and the Illinois defense came ready to play, and, Drew just was an inexperienced quarterback out there. It's fine. He was a little inconsistent. He made some mistakes. He didn't see some things he was supposed to. I think Marty covered it perfectly. I really don't have a ton more to add, honestly. Sure. But, yeah, I think he'll be all right moving forward. He didn't get a lot of help, like you said. I think Trey Wallace is a huge security blanket for him out there at receiver. He's relied on him quite a bit early on. Not having him out there definitely affected the flow of the game for the receiver room. No one else really stepped up in his absence. You look at the stat line, I think Singleton was the highest with 3 receptions. So it was really just kind of all over the place with the receiver room. A couple of key drops. Malik McClain took a big step back this week, unfortunately. I thought he was starting to emerge as a guy in this room, and he had 2 really big drops that absolutely killed drives. So I think, we'll see what happens if they can get Amari Evans back soon. Maybe he's the guy that can step up, but they need to figure something out with that receiver room. And yeah, like Marty said, it's just something that Drew's going to look at the tape. He's going to learn a lot from it. He's not going to like what he sees. Hopefully that motivates him and fuels him to be better next week. I think he'll be better prepared moving forward. But on the topic of Newton, that guy's a stud.
Yeah.
I mean, he was all over the place. He was batting down passes. He was just disruptive. And the offensive line, when they weren't blocking him, they were actually pretty serviceable.
Sure.
When they were blocking him, they were having a lot of trouble. Even Olu was having trouble with Newton. He's one of those dudes that, like Marty said, he's probably the best defensive lineman they're going to play all year. And he's probably going to be walking across the stage in April as a first-round pick. So, you can at least rest easy knowing that you're not going to have too many players like him on the other side the rest of the year. But, yeah, Drew will be fine. Just a learning experience for him.
Yeah, Pro Football Focus had Newton with 7 total quarterback pressures in this game, including 5 hurries. He batted down, I think, 2 passes, had 4 tackles. I mean, he was, I think 2 of them were for a loss. He was just all over the place and showed why he was one of the best defensive tackles in the country on Saturday against Penn State. That's the type of performance for Newton that NFL, general managers and scouts are going to look at on tape, and we're going to point back when he gets drafted in the first round next April. Be like, his game against Penn State was really one that made him stand out among the rest. That being said, overall, Drew's performance, they're not the best, but like we said, things that can be worked going forward and should be improved in the next couple of weeks. And for Penn State's sake, they would hope by this upcoming Saturday. The offensive line, Anthony kind of touched on it. When they weren't blocking Newton, it wasn't a terrible day. Let me go back to the PFF stats actually here quickly. But in the game, Illinois had 12 total quarterback pressures on Drew. obviously not a great number, but 7 of those 12 came from Newton. I mean, that is a significant amount of one team's pass rush coming from one guy. The next closest was Gabe Jackus, who had 2 pressures in the game. So like you said, Anthony, when it wasn't with Newton, they did a pretty good job. It wasn't a great performance by any means, but it was one that I think when you look back at it, it wasn't as bad as it felt live. And I'd also say people are going to point to the run game blocking being poor, and it wasn't great, but and we talked about this before we went live here. Illinois in week 1 and 2 against Toledo and Kansas really struggled with mobile quarterbacks. Drew is not mobile, so they did not have to respect Drew's mobility in this game. They were able to just tee off on him in the pass rush, but also with him not being a threat in a run situations, they could just stack the box with 8-9 guys and fill every gap possible. And that's why Penn State really did struggle in that first half or so with the rushing attack. I mean, it wasn't a great day even after the first half, but if you look at the stats, I mean, Penn State still finished with 219 rushing yards in the game. Sorry, not 219. Still finished 164 rushing yards in the game. Bo Prabula had 5.2 yards per carry. Katron Allen, 4.2. Nicholas Singleton was able to get some more success as the day went on as well. So I guess I'll go back to you, Marty. Any concerns about this offensive line, their performance on Saturday against Illinois and going forward? Obviously, I think the middle of the line with Salim Worley, J.B. Nelson, of course, and then Hunter Norzad in the middle is probably a little bit concerning based off their performance against West Virginia and Illinois. But I think these are things that Penn State can still work out here in the upcoming weeks. Really, the challenge is just getting out of the Iowa game unscathed, because after that, you have Northwestern, a bye week, and UMass before you have to play Ohio State.
Yeah, like you said, after the Iowa game, you're essentially going to have 3 straight bye weeks. I mean, no disrespect to Northwestern or UMass, obviously, but Northwestern might be the worst Power 5 team in the country and by a long margin this year. And, UMass is UMass. But, yeah, with this offensive line, I do have some concerns. I think it's hard not to. After this game, you look, Olu struggled against Newton. Olu kind of just is Olu. Like, he's an elite pass blocker. He's always struggled with run blocking. That has continued this year. And Caden Wallace gets a lot of crap, for myself included. But run blocking, if he gets a hold of you, he's probably going to maul you. Pass blocking, he's serviceable. But that interior, definitely a concern right now. You have to wonder, like, is Hunter Norzad just – I don't know if he's just never healthy. Sal Wormley definitely leaves a lot to be desired at right guard. And J.B. Nelson, I think, has been good but not great. So, I don't know what they're going to do there. But I definitely have some concerns.
And you do bring up Caden Wallace, and for our viewers on YouTube, they're seeing our notable performers for the game. And we actually didn't talk about Nicholas Singleton. We can go back to him. Quiet day, but he had a good day overall. But Caden Wallace, 31 pass blocking opportunities on Saturday and allowed no pressure. For a guy who struggled in pass blocking last year at times, that's a pretty notable performance for Caden Wallace, and one that Penn State hopes he can build on going forward, because they'll need him to be a stalwart right tackle for them going forward the rest of the season if they want to, compete for a Big Ten championship and potentially the college football playoffs.
Yeah, like you said, you need Wallace to be a stalwart on this offensive line if they're going to get to where they want to get, and you've seen better from him. Like I said, the pass blocking is getting there. The run blocking has always been a strength. But, yeah, that was the one thing I took away coming out of this game as a true concern, and not just, like I said, there's a lot of things that were kind of annoying, frustrating. But to me, the one thing that was a true concern was his offensive line. I thought it's just – and maybe some of it is just being a Penn State fan and being kind of burnt by it or whatever, of just – oh, man, here we go again. But, Yeah, no, I think all things considered, the offense. I'm saying this. I think they'll be okay. You know,
Sure.
I think they'll be okay. I think they might struggle some against Iowa because it's Iowa and that's what they do. But I think they're going to be okay. But there's definitely some concerns there when you face an Iowa, when you face Michigan, when you face an Ohio State, when you face these upper echelon defenses that you need to beat in order to win the Big Ten. I still think there's some concerns there about the offensive line.
Sure, Anthony, do you share those same concerns?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think Caden Wallace gets a lot of flack, and he's inconsistent at times. He's going to give up a sack or two in a game, and you're going to be like, oh, there goes Wallace again. But overall this year, I actually think he's been all right. I haven't had too many concerns about him, and I think he's actually improved a little bit. So that's a positive there. It definitely is the interior, specifically guys like Hunter Norzad and Sal Wormley, that I'm a little more concerned about. It just feels like the consistency has not been there with those guys. And just with the Penn State offensive line in general, like everyone said all offseason, oh, this is the strength of this team. This is the strength of this team finally. Outside of Olu, I just didn't really see it. Like I didn't really understand, probably just because we had a top 5 caliber offensive tackle on the team, which is the first time we've had that in a long time.
Sure.
But I just, I didn't really get the hype yet. I've always been believe it when I see it with this offensive line. And yeah, while it hasn't been bad, and it's definitely better than it was 3, 4, 5 years ago, it's still not, where you'd want it to be or where you'd hope it would be, at this point in time. So hopefully, if Norzad just isn't healthy and is just playing hurt, hopefully he can get healthy. Hopefully those guys can, take a step up and learn from this. Maybe it's just because Illinois was playing 8 or 9 in the box and, they were just the numbers game. They were outmatched the entire time. And maybe that's a big part of why we have this opinion. But
Sure.
yeah, it just felt like, you were hoping they'd play a little better as a unit, and especially on the interior, it just didn't feel like that happened.
Sure. And I'm looking at the Penn State Pro Football Focus blocking grades for the season so far through 3 games. Some notable numbers according to Pro Football Focus, what they have credited. Through 3 games, Penn State has allowed 21 pressures. Now, 12 of those came against Illinois alone. The biggest, offender of allowing pressures right now is Hunter Norzad. They have him allowed 5 pressures so far this season. J.B. Nelson has allowed 3. Sal Wormley has allowed 3. Vega Ione as well as 3. And then Caden Wallace with 3. So, I mean, out of those top 4 guys, 3 of the 4 are interior offensive linemen, which absolutely, goes with what you guys have been saying about the weakness of that offensive line right now being the interior. Caden Wallace, I will say, has felt like he has improved from last year, as Anthony said. But I think the overall good news here is Penn State, and this isn't a knock on Clifford. Well, it kind of is, but Clifford, we all agree, had a tendency at times to hold on to the ball too long, not feel the pressure. He didn't have that pocket presence a lot during his career at Penn State. What we've seen out of Drew so far in his time with the Nittany Lions as their starting quarterback especially is that he has great pocket presence. He feels that pressure coming, and he usually gets the ball out. I mean, he's only been hit 6 times this year, and he's only been sacked once. That is, to a degree, a credit to the offensive line, but also a credit to Drew as well, which is only going to help him going forward in Big Ten play. Any final thoughts on the offensive line? All right. We briefly touched on it, and we'll briefly touch on it again. I'll bring up back the stats here. The wide receiver room had a tough day. Malik McClain, Anthony talked about it being kind of a guy who disappointed against Illinois with 2 drops, only had 1 reception for 6 yards. I mean, nobody had more than 3 receptions here, and that was a tie between Nicholas Singleton, Tyler Warren, Keandre Lambert-Smith. KLS had a rough day himself, both penalty-wise and receiving-wise. I mean, I think the one play that kind of stacks out to me for KLS was, and I think it was the second quarter, but do you guys remember there was a crossing route where KLS caught the ball a couple yards short of the sticks, and instead of going forward, he just kind of decided to go towards the sidelines when he could have possibly picked up a first down there. I didn't think it was the best performance out of Lambert Smith, especially after having a strong season opener against West Virginia. I thought that was a bit of a disappointing effort on his part. The tight ends probably had their best day of the season to a degree. Tyler Warren continues to be solid. But the guy that I think really kind of flashed, and our viewers on YouTube may have seen him in our notable performance earlier, was Caden Saunders. He only had 4 snaps in the game, but he was targeted 3 times on those 4 snaps and had 2 receptions for 19 yards. It's only 2 receptions, but I thought he looked, I thought he had a nice burst to his game after both receptions. He looked smooth out there, so perhaps Penn State can start getting him going and more involved in this offense. But I think the biggest takeaway out of Saturday's performance from the wide receiver room is that Trey Wallace is a huge part of this wide receiver room, and without him, the depth and quality of the room takes quite a bit of a hit. Anthony, we'll start with you. Just are you, after 2 strong weeks, how concerned are you? 2 strong weeks and then this tough performance against Illinois. Where are you with this Penn State wide receiver room? Are you concerned? If so, is that a high-level concern, medium, low? Just what's your overall feelings about this Penn State wide receiver room after 3 weeks? Obviously, they have the talent. They flashed the first 2 weeks, but this past performance, I would say, definitely is one that hits the confidence level for a lot of Penn State fans.
Yeah, I think as long as you have KLS and Trey Wallace out there at the same time, I think there's really not much concern for me. I think if you take one of them out of the equation, like you did against Illinois, yeah, this room is not consistent enough to inspire a lot of confidence. So, yeah, I was surprised that KLS didn't have a better performance. Obviously, he could have had a much bigger day if Drew sees him downfield on that when he was wide open, like you guys talked about earlier. But, yeah, he made that one nice play, and then you really didn't see much of him, the rest of the game. But, yeah, they need Trey Wallace out there to be effective. Like I said earlier, he's kind of a security blanket for Drew. He was a big factor in that West Virginia game with 7 catches. He's just a guy that he looks to, especially over the middle. He's just a really athletic and, really talented receiver. But, yeah, they haven't had a third guy step up. You were hoping that maybe Malik McLean would be that guy after the West Virginia game. Obviously, that confidence took a big hit. Dante Cephas has not been what we thought he would be out of the transfer portal. Seeing Caden Saunders out there was interesting. I made note of it the second I saw the number 7 out there, and they targeted him immediately. So he made some nice plays. It looks like he's got some bursts, so maybe that's a guy they start looking to moving forward. Liam Clifford, he's a steady Eddie in my opinion. Obviously, he had that huge catch on that beautiful throw by Drew. It was definitely Drew's best throw of the day in my opinion. I said Clifford would be a guy that he'd get you a big play when you needed it. He'd have 2 catches a game, and they'd be 2 big ones, and that came through against Illinois, in my opinion. So you've got him as a consistent guy, but maybe not a superstar. So you've got pieces, but again, you've got 2 guys you can depend on, and then a couple other guys that you hope they show up. They may or they may not.
Marty, what's your concern of the wide receiver room?
I think, as we've said throughout this show, they miss Trey Wallace a lot more than you thought they would miss Trey Wallace. Especially I think he's the guy they've gone to in early downs. He's the guy they've gone to move the sticks. Both of those Malik McLean drops are balls that probably are targets for Trey Wallace if he's playing. So I think that's a factor. Now that said, I'm with you, Anthony. And number 3 needs to step up. And I still think it could be McLean. I'm not – even with those 2 drops, he still finished with I think he had like 2 or 3 catches on the day. It's not like he did nothing. So I still think it can be Malik McLean. And with Caden Saunders, I remember at the end of the game looking at the box score, and 2 catches didn't feel right. It seemed like maybe it's because he maximized the opportunity he got. Yep. But at least to me, it felt like he made a bigger impact than that. He was a former top 100, maybe even top 50 recruit off the top of my head. Very highly rated guy, has that big playability. I would really like to see more of Saunders moving forward. He's a guy I've always been super high on. So hopefully this can be start of him putting it together and emerging as a legitimate target for Drew Lock, because they need that third guy. And like I said, I think it still could be Malik McClain. I definitely think Saunders could do it, but somebody's got to step up and do it, because you can't continue to have Keandre Lambert-Smith and Trey Wallace do all of it, especially if you have a day like yesterday where Lambert-Smith is off and Wallace doesn't play. And I just one more comment I'll have on Keandre Lambert-Smith on Saturday is, how many times since he's gotten to campus have we heard his biggest problem can be getting in his own head and being his own worst enemy?
Yeah.
I feel like we saw some of that Saturday. That penalty.
Yeah.
Dylan, you mentioned the play where he could have cut up field, got more yards, got the first down, and wasn't doing enough north-south, too much east-west. It just felt like a game where a guy kind of got in his own head a little bit, and we saw it impact his play. So hopefully he'll kick that, have a nice bounce-back performance against Iowa this Saturday. But, yeah, that wide receiver room, I'm not worried about it yet, especially because the first two games were so good. But you need a consistent number 3 to emerge. And I think if you can get Omari Evans back healthy, whenever that may be, that may single-handedly solve your problems of needing a consistent number 3 also.
Sure. And to wrap up this offensive discussion, I guess just in general, some key stats about Penn State's offense on Saturday. 15 total drives, had 3 5-and-outs, had 6 scoring drives, so 40% of their drives resulted in scores. I think the biggest takeaway for me was just early on their inability to get anything really going consistently. But as that game progressed, you saw them kind of, once they made those second half adjustments, they came out of halftime, had 2 3-and-outs, but after that, they had 5 plays, 16 yards, 7 for 70, 3 for 30, 6 for 20, 6 for 28. It never was great, but they found more consistency as the game went on. I think that's notable. Also, we saw Penn State not be afraid to add some razzle-dazzle. One of the big scores in the game was Trey Potts taking, what was it, a toss in the backfield? Taking a toss, going out to the sideline, and then pulling up and finding Tyler Warren in the end zone for a touchdown. That made it a 23-7 game, and I think that play is was the dagger for Illinois. They didn't have the same, I think, oomph in their game after that Penn State touchdown, and that's the time, if you're Penn State, to pull that type of play out. They needed a touchdown on that drive, and they dug into the playbook to find it. And I know people always say Penn State or an offense isn't going to put out, a ton for their later opponents. But James Franklin, over his career, has always been a guy who says, put it more on tape in terms of getting opposing defenses to worry about more different things. It takes away from preparing for other things because you have to now prepare for more. So I'm sure that's not the last little bit of trickery we'll see out of Penn State here going forward. But overall, I thought the Penn State offense performance was solid in the grand scheme of things. A lot to clean up, but not as bad as it probably felt in real time. What's your guys, starting with you, Anthony, what's your final thoughts on the offense?
Yeah, on that Trey Potts touchdown, I think it's pretty funny that the most passing touchdowns in the game on the Penn State side came from the third-string running back.
Yeah.
Franklin said earlier in the week that we're going to see more of Trey Potts going forward. I don't think that's what everyone had in mind when he said that, but hey, he made a nice throw. Obviously, I wouldn't want him to do that too many times moving forward. It wasn't the prettiest throw, but Tyler Warren had some nice feet there. We were able to get 2 feet down in bounds. It was an NFL touchdown. But yeah, good play there. Pretty much sealed the game for Penn State. And just a quick summary of the offense. Again, you did enough to score 30 points. You did enough to win the game comfortably.
Yep.
There's still plenty of things to clean up. The biggest thing for me, honestly, I could deal with everything else. Everything else is fixable. They got to be more disciplined.
Sure.
Like, too many penalties, jumping off sides, too many false starts. That one penalty from KLS made me throw my hat across the room. It was just so unnecessary. Even if it was a little soft by the refs, it doesn't matter. Don't put yourself in that position. Just clean that up, and I think Penn State will be fine.
before I hand it off to Marty here, just two things to add and get Marty's thoughts on it. I think that if you're a Penn State fan, the big positives to take away from this is one, Penn State was not explosive at all really on Saturday. Just 7 big plays, 4 through the air of 18, 19, 33, and 19 yards, and then 3 rushing plays of 18, 16, and 21. And that last one was a Bo Papula run. So I think the fact that they were able to score 30 points, rack up nearly 400 yards despite not being explosive is a sign of how good this offense can be and the talent that's on this offense. But also, third and shorts in this game, they were 3 for 4, I believe. And then on third down rushing attempts, they had 9 attempts for 63 yards. I think those are things you can definitely build on coming out of this performance. But Marty, what was your final takeaways from this, wrapping up the offense discussion here?
Yeah, to me, the biggest offense, and Anthony kind of touched on it, is there's nothing really to concern you. It's all fixable. I thought Mike Yurcich overall had a good game. It was lack of execution. But like we've said, dumb penalties, Drew missing throws and missing reads, receivers, making wrong cuts. There were definitely a few times in this game where Nick Singleton got the ball and there was a hole there, and I don't know if he just didn't see it or what, and just tried to bounce it when he shouldn't have. So it was all execution issues, and that's the kind of stuff that, as much as it'll drive you insane, that stuff's easy to clean up. That's the kind of stuff you can work on in practice. So to me, outside of maybe the interior offensive line, no real concerns or anything to sort about this offense right now, because again, I feel like against Illinois, almost all of their issues were poor execution, and again, poor execution is something that you can clean up in practice.
Absolutely agree with you there. I guess let's turn to the defense. We've kind of touched on it already, but we'll touch on it a little more. The big takeaways: 5 turnovers forced, including 4 interceptions. I believe it was 7 tackles for a loss and 3 sacks. Just start to finish, a really quality performance for Penn State's defense. I think the two big, really, I mean, you can't even say that because all 3 levels really performed well. But the first couple weeks of the season, it felt like Penn State's pass rush left more to be desired. But this weekend against Illinois, that pass rush performed really well overall, with, of course, all those pressures we mentioned, as well as the 3 sacks. They were a pivotal part of slowing down that Illinois rushing attack as well. But also the linebacker play was really solid from Dominic DeLuca, Abdul Carter, Kobe King. I mean, Dominic DeLuca has become one of Penn State's best defenders against the run so far this season. After having a pick 6 last week, he forced a fumble early on this week that led to points. You have to feel really good about that front 7 after this one, after a good but not great first 2 games. Anthony, what's your thoughts on that front 7? We'll, of course, talk a little bit more about that secondary as well.
Yeah, it feels like they're slowly starting to get their feet under them. They're slowly starting to get more pressure. It's been a little surprising that, Chop, DDS, those guys haven't had the impact that I thought they would this early in the season. They haven't been bad by any stretch, but they also haven't, been all over the field like I expected. I think they'll eventually get there. Don't get me wrong. I'm not concerned about it. But I think Adiza Isaac had a fantastic game. I think he was probably, along the defensive line, he was probably one of the MVPs of that game. Made some really nice plays. He was all over the field, especially in run support. A tremendous game from Isaac there. The defensive line will be fine. I thought Izzard made a great impact on his return back. Obviously, I think they missed him dearly in the interior. He's going to be a guy moving forward that I think will have an increased role as he starts to get healthy again. Encouraging things on the defensive line in this game. I think they'll continue to get better and better as the season gets on.
And I threw up for our viewers on YouTube the game comparison, so you could see how the 2 teams matched up overall. But yeah, great thoughts on there, Anthony. Marty, how do you feel about that front 7 performance against the Illini? I mean, that was a pretty dominant performance from start to finish for both groups.
Yeah, definitely the best game of the season so far for the linebackers as a whole. I mean, I think through 3 games, you can argue Curtis Jacobs has been the best player on this defense, and he was all over the place again on Saturday. Abdul Carter looked like Abdul Carter.
Yeah.
Similar to the Caden Saunders thing, I was really surprised at the end of the game when he was only credited with, I think, 4 tackles, because
Yeah.
it just felt like Abdul was everywhere. Not just that interception, but just stringing plays up, blowing plays up, being disruptive, causing chaos. I think you could argue Adiza Isaac was the best player on Penn State's defense on Saturday. That was a great call by you two with him. Izzard back in a big way with 2 sacks, and then that secondary. We'll get to them obviously, but yeah, just I thought that the front seven was tremendous. It's what we expected to see out of this front seven coming into the year. I think that them tightening up the rotations at linebacker proved to be extremely beneficial. And yeah, if you can consistently get the linebackers and the defensive line to perform that way, and that's not a stretch because that's what you expect out of them, this defense can be elite. And it's Anthony, you mentioned that the sack numbers, that sort of thing, haven't been there, but like Chop Robinson on Saturday, I'm not sure if he even had a tackle for a loss. Now, he didn't have a sack, but he was all over the place. He was blowing plays up, consistently beating the tackle off the ball, almost had an interception. Like he's been impacting the game in so many ways that even though the sack and TFL numbers for him haven't really been there yet, they've been okay, because he's impacting the game in other ways.
Sure. Here's some just further discussion on how strong the front seven played. Just a few guys. Adiza Isaac, 5 total pressures, 4 tackles, half a sack, 1 TFL, 1 quarterback hurry. The quarterback pressures and hurries, courtesy of Pro Football Focus, by the way. Chop Robinson, 5 hurries, 2 tackles, 1 TFL, 1 pass breakup. DeLuca, 6 tackles, 1 TFL, 1 forced fumble. Abdul Carter, 3 quarterback hurries, 3 tackles, 1 interception. Dominant performances all around. And I think those numbers really drive it home, how dominant they were. Obviously, the secondary was, I think, the star of the game, despite the 269 total yards allowed. Like I said, a good chunk of that came in the fourth quarter. But overall, this secondary, 3 interceptions on the day. They rarely allowed a big pass play, I think, throughout the evening. I'll look it up right here quickly. They allowed before the fourth quarter, they allowed 3 total big pass plays of 15-plus yards. If you do that week in and week out, you're going to win almost every time. Anthony, thoughts on that secondary performance? Obviously, another dominant performance.
Yeah, A-plus performance from the secondary. Honestly, I hate to say worst performance, but the worst performance, quote unquote, of the day probably was from Kalen King. And if he's having the worst game on your secondary's having a really good day. Johnny Dixon was phenomenal. Cam Miller was phenomenal. Daquan Hardy on that interception, I said it before, it was a textbook defensive interception. It was fantastic. Read it like a book, was step for step with the defender the entire time, turns around at the right moment. Altmaier obviously threw it a little short, which is why he was able to pick it off, but still, just textbook defense by Hardy there. His absence was definitely missed a little bit.
That was a nice
in the first 2 games, but having him back it's so big moving forward. He's such a good defender. If Hardy was 6'1" instead of like 5'8", Hardy's probably one of the best defenders in the country, and he's already really, really good.
That was a very nice welcome back moment for Daquan Hardy after his absence.
Absolutely. So don't need to say too much about the secondary. Just phenomenal all around.
Cam Miller also had an interception on Saturday. He's been somebody who's been really, I think, impressive through this first part of the season. PFF had him as the highest graded coverage guy against Illinois. He's definitely shown some flashes in his limited opportunities out there.
Yeah. One more thing on Miller too. Even on that touchdown he gave up in garbage time, he was right there with the defender. It was solid defense. It was just a nice throw and a nice catch. So again, Miller's been great. Obviously, a great interception there, and yeah, I think he's continuing to get confidence, and he's going to be important for this team moving forward. So, I hope he continues to have these type of performances.
Marty, thoughts on the secondary?
Just really good, and it was a group effort. You mentioned the interceptions. You mentioned Kalen King probably having the weakest game of the group, which I agree with, but I also still think it may have been Kalen King's best game of the season, which is a testament to how well the secondary played. KJ Winston had a really strong game. There were a couple plays I can think of, one specifically on a third down where just beautiful coverage and break a pass up. Jalen Reed oftentimes drew that slot assignment of Isaiah Williams. I thought Jalen Reed had just a really good game that flew completely under the radar. He was all over the field for the defense as well. So, yeah, just a great game. The secondary showing what we all expected coming into the year, that despite the loss of Tig Brown and Joey Porter Jr., they could still be one of the best in the country, and they certainly looked like it on Saturday.
Yeah, it's so hard to judge King right now too, because they're just not opposing offenses aren't thrown at him, which you'd assume, but just 13 targets, which actually still leads the team. But I mean, he's only been targeted three times a game, really 3-4 times a game. Only allowed 5 receptions on those 13 targets, but Cam Miller definitely has been impressive. Johnny Dixon had a nice game as well. Not really much we can take off the second that we haven't talked about the secondary before. Last parts I want to hit on the defense. At linebacker, Tony Rojas, for a third straight week, got some solid run in mop-up duty. Every time he steps on the field, he looks better and better. He's a kid who looks like he's really settling into the college game, and he has improved quite a bit from that first game against West Virginia, where it looked like he was a true freshman playing in his first game. It looks like the game is slowing down for Tony Rojas. I don't know if you guys would agree. Tyler Elsdon only played 11 snaps, which I think is quite notable. This was a guy who, was a starter for Penn State. Did he start week 1 against West Virginia?
No, Kobe King's been the starter.
Yeah, right. Kobe King started. But Elsdon saw quite a bit of playing time the first 2 weeks of the season. And then this week, just 11 snaps. That is a big shift in what we have seen in the past from this Penn State coaching staff with Tyler Elsdon. So, I mean, but I don't think it's a fluke that the fewer snaps Elsdon sees, the better he looks. He's a guy you can put out there who does well in short spurts, but if he's on the field too much, he's going to get exposed.
Yeah, I'm not going to add to him.
Yeah, but primarily my thoughts there was on Tony Rojas. Would you guys agree through 3 games that Tony Rojas just looks to be getting better and better each game, more comfortable? It definitely looks like it's slowing down.
Yeah, I mean, he's a true freshman. He's a guy that once he puts it together, once he continues to get, more experience out there, he's a guy that's going to be featured a lot more in this defense. He's too athletic. He's too talented of a football player not to eventually get to a level, especially I think in this year he'll get to that level where he's going to be a regular contributor at linebacker. So, yeah, that's why they're getting in these reps, because they want to get him ready for the stretch run later in the year where you're going to need that quality depth.
Good. Marty?
Yeah, and not just Rojas. I think a lot of the freshmen on this defense in general. King Mack just slowly but surely playing more and more reps every week, and he looks like he belongs. Zion Tracy had a really nice tackle on Sunday where Illinois threw a little spot pass out to the receiver. Tracy came up the field one-on-one, broke down, wrapped him up, took him to the ground. It was beautiful. It was it was a play you would show kids who you're trying to teach how to tackle in the open field. Elliott Washington has looked like he belongs. So, it's not just Tony Rojas. It's a lot of the freshmen in that secondary, and Rojas, the linebacker who played this year. You can see why they were highly rated kids. You can see why they're kids who James Franklin made the decision very early on to greenlight this year, and it's encouraging for the future of this defense, not just the present, because these guys can help, especially on special teams right now. But you've always, to an extent, have to have one eye towards the future in college football, and you know, Rojas, Tracy, Mack,
Yep.
Washington, they look like they belong. They've really impressed me. It's like I said, especially King Mack.
I'd like to go back to actually the front seven quickly. Talk about the defensive tackles. Keziah Hazard returned this week, and now that Penn State has five. I mean, they have five defensive tackles that they trust: Durant, Keziah Hazard, Devon Ellis, Jordan Vandenberg, and Hakeem Beamon. All those guys kind of played equal amount of reps. But I thought the defensive tackles did really well on Saturday in plugging up the holes on the run, slowing down that Illinois run game. Just any thoughts on the DTs now that they're all looking like they're all healthy?
The one thing I will say about the DTs are two things. First off, I thought Hakeem Beamon played his best game of the season thus far. And one thing that was not an issue with the defensive tackles on Saturday that had been an issue at times in the past, especially that Michigan game last year, was gap integrity. They kept their gaps. They were where they needed to be. Because last year, that Michigan game, a lot of those gaping holes that Blake Corum was running through, it wasn't even necessarily Michigan's offensive line moving guys out of the way. It was guys from Penn State being in the wrong place.
Yeah.
And that wasn't a problem on Saturday. Like I said to open the show, as maligned as this rush defense has been, as maligned as it was by some people on social media on Saturday, they held an Illinois team who wants to line up and run the ball right at you. A Brett Bielema team held them to 2.1 yards per carry. It was a tremendous effort, and it all started with that defensive line, specifically those defensive tackles. Like I said, in my opinion, Beamon played his best game of the year so far. We've said it, Izzard flashed in his return. I thought Zane Durant was really good. I thought outside of his dumb penalty, Devon Ellis was pretty solid. Really, really strong game from the defensive tackles, in my opinion.
And that's going to be big for Penn State going in next week against Iowa if everybody is, in fact, healthy for next week. And then finally, the last down, Illinois.
One more thing real quick.
Yep.
I mean, obviously, we're not going to get into Iowa tonight too much, but I will say with the defensive tackles in Iowa, Luke Lachey is Iowa's best player on offense. He's not going to play. He just dislocated his ankle on Saturday. He's not playing next week. And he's their tight end, for those who don't know. He's Cade McNamara's #1 target. So Iowa's probably going to look to run the ball even more than they already were going to.
Great
so
point.
It's going to be vital for these defensive tackles to back that performance up with another one like that.
Great point. Last thing on Illinois, and then we'll give our early thoughts on Penn State versus Iowa. Does Penn State finally have their kicker? Alex Felkins now through, what was it? Played most of that West Virginia. He played half West Virginia, most of Delaware. For the last 2.5 games, he's looked pretty good. He made 3 of 4 kicks on Saturday. The only one he didn't make was a 52-yard attempt that got blocked. He looks calm, cool, and collected out there. He doesn't look like the moment's too big for him. Obviously, we'll see how he does with the moments getting bigger as the season goes on. But I think he has definitely kind of brought consistency to that position. It's only in the short term so far, but the early results are promising for him.
Yeah, I was worried that we were going to gloss over this. I was going to have to bring it back up to highlight it. To me, this was like one of the biggest stories of the game was that, Alex Felkins, 45-yarder. I feel like all of us are probably sweating a little bit when he stepped up to kick it, but he steps up, drills it with confidence right down the middle. Really kind of eased my concerns. He made the easy ones, made the 28-yarder, made the 20-yarder, 3 of 4 on the day, I believe. Missed the 52-yarder because it was blocked. Whatever, he missed a 50-yarder. I'm not gonna fret too much.
And to add on that 52-yarder quickly, I think the big part, a lot of people on our forums were like, "Why are they kicking it there?" I think what Penn State fans should be taking away from that is that James Franklin and Stacey Collins had the confidence in Felkins to attempt that 52-yarder, and they have confidence that he has the leg to make that 52-yarder. Because we were talking coming into the season, could it be a Sanders Sahadak takes the long field goals? Felkins is the guy within 45. But if Felkins, if they're confident Felkins has that type of leg, then I mean that in itself is notable that they were willing for him to attempt that in that situation as well.
Yeah, but no, moral of the story, I think they do have their kicker, at least for right now. I think Falcons has proven that he should be the guy out there in those situations, and I think they're going to continue to go to him unless he gives them a reason not to. So, a very good start for Falcons. I think he's clearly cemented himself as the guy moving forward.
Sure. And then, Marty, thoughts on Falcons? Because special teams, that kicking game was something that you've been very passionate about. Could be the Achilles heel of this Penn State team and potentially be what keeps them out of being a playoff team.
No, I agree with everything Anthony said. Is Falcons the answer? I don't think we can say yes or no yet, but I think right now he's the guy.
Sure.
Dylan, our group chat with Clay, he made a good point on Saturday where it was like it kind of got to the second or third quarter and Falcons came out to kick and we're like, all right, I actually expect him to make this, and he did. Which is something at the beginning of the year you weren't going to have with this group. So again, I'm with what Anthony said, 52-yard. Even if he would have shanked that thing, whatever, it's 50-plus. You're not going to attempt a 50-plus-yard kick very often. But yeah, him hitting that 45-yarder, and this was something Dylan I also mentioned in our group chat during the game. Obviously, James Franklin would never in a million years say this, but I would be willing to bet he wasn't exactly, completely tore up that his offense flamed out on that drive and it allowed Falcons to attempt a 45-yard kick on the road in conference play and then proceed to make it, because that can be big for his confidence, for momentum, for all of that. And you can make those kicks all you want in practice, but there's nothing compares to making it on the road in a conference game. So, I think that was, if you want to take away some silver linings from Penn State's offense failing to finish drives in the first half of this game, it was that it allowed Falcons to kind of start to get into a little bit of a rhythm with kicking. And I mentioned earlier before that kicking is very much, it's like hitting a baseball. It's rhythm. If your timing and rhythm is off, you're going to struggle. And Falcons was able to go out there Saturday and make 2 kicks, including that big 45-yarder on the road in conference play. That could be nothing but a positive moving forward.
100% agree with you there. Last thing about this game that I would note, with the game, Penn State has now scored 30-plus points in 10 straight games. That ties the highest of the James Franklin era, longest streak of the James Franklin era. Joe Moorhead did so in 2016 through 2017. The opponent that stopped Joe Moorhead and Penn State from scoring 30-plus points, the Iowa Hawkeyes. Which brings us to our next point and topic of discussion here. Penn State opened on Sunday as a 14-point favorite over the Iowa Hawkeyes. Over-under, I believe, is set at 39.5 right now. This is a good Iowa team, guys. In the general scheme of things, top 25 ranked Iowa team. But I think on paper, this is an Iowa team that Penn State should absolutely still beat on. I think the 14-point line maybe a little bit generous, but I think it's a line that Penn State could absolutely cover. I texted you guys, I think, throughout the Illinois game that I know they struggled, and kind of what we talked about with how the Illinois defense is going to help set up a potential success against Iowa. I have pretty strong confidence in me that, not confidence, but there's a good part of me that thinks Penn State can go out on Saturday against Iowa and put up 30 points again. This is just from top to bottom a talented offense. The offensive line is still a pretty damn good offensive line, one of the better ones in the Big Ten. You have 2 of the best running backs in the country. You have a quarterback who can make any throw. You have 2 really good tight ends. I don't know if there's many defenses out there that could really stop this Penn State offense enough to stop them from getting to 30 points this year. And on the flip side, I think a big part of that is because this Penn State defense, as we've seen the last 2 weeks, is starting to, A, create turnovers, and B, get off the field quickly. If this Penn State offense is going to get 12, 13, 14, 15 possessions a game, I think they're going to score on 6 or 7 of those drives almost weekly. I mean, and 50% isn't always going to be great, but I mean, am I wrong to feel this way about how the defense complements the offense and just giving them more opportunities? I mean, I just don't know how many times opposing defenses are going to be able to stop Penn State if you give them 15 possessions a game.
Yeah, no, we talked about this before we came on. I I tend to think that Penn State went into this Illinois game, with a little bit of an eye towards Iowa. I
Sure.
feel like they feel like Iowa's going to do a lot of similar things offensively and defensively that Illinois tried to do.
Yep.
And especially offensively, I almost feel like Yursich said, we're going to run right into the teeth of this 8-9 stack in the box because we don't want to give Iowa a lot on tape as to what we're going to do to adjust to that. And I think he kind of knew that we can be pretty vanilla in this one outside of a trick play or two and still beat Illinois comfortably. I don't think he was ever worried about, Illinois staging a comeback or this offense not being able to put up enough points to win. So, maybe it's just a cop-out, but I almost kind of feel like yours was like, yeah, we don't really have to adjust that much and we'll still put up 30 points. So, I wouldn't be shocked if there was a little bit of an eye towards Iowa and, prepping as to how they can adjust to what Illinois did to what Iowa's going to do next weekend.
Sure. Marty, early thoughts on Penn State, Iowa overall?
Yeah, ultimately, this is a game that Penn State should win. I mean, that 14, that's a big number against a team like Iowa, but it's the white out. Iowa's offense is awful. So we'll see. I definitely going to be picking Penn State to win. I don't know what I'll say score-wise, but yeah, I think they can get to the 30 points, and part of that's because of what you guys mentioned. Like, you don't expect much from Iowa's offense at all against any defense, let alone one of the caliber of Penn State's. So I think the ability, the possibility, the chances, whatever it may be, of Iowa's defense just getting worn out as the game goes on is there. And one other thing that I think is a real thing for Saturday. You better believe, after what happened in Iowa City 2 years ago, not even so much Iowa winning the game, but the way they won it, the actions of Kirk Ferentz and his coaching staff during that game, some of the things Kirk said after the game, this thing's circled on the calendar. This one's been circled on the calendar for a while. You throw in the fact it's a whiteout, this crowd is going to be jacked up. This crowd is going to be ticked off about things that were said and done by Kirk Ferentz and his coaching staff 2 years ago. I don't know if it happens because it very rarely happens against Iowa, but I do think the possibility is there for this thing to, no pun intended with the whiteout, to just snowball on Iowa in a hurry and Penn State absolutely run away with it also.
I was going to say, would you be shocked if this is a 2016 type game where Penn State wins 41-14? I mean,
Not at all. And I think part of it is the coaching staff, I think, would absolutely love to come out and do that against Iowa. Again, not that they lost in Iowa City 2 years ago, and I think it's more of how they lost, and then just the accusations of players. I mean, you have PJ
everything surrounding the
game, and basically derailed his entire career that day, and you had Kirk Ferentz coming after the game calling it fake, saying he was just. I think there's going to be a lot of bad blood between these coaching staffs on Saturday, and I don't think. We've seen it in the past when James has it out for somebody. If he has the chance, he'll keep the pedal down, and I wouldn't be. I'm not going to pick that to happen on Saturday, but it's not going to surprise me if it does.
And the other thing, I just don't know how Iowa's going to consistently move the football. I mean, you look at what Cade McNamara's done this year: 38 for 70, 4 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Against Western Michigan, he completed 9 of 19 passes. He completed 12 of 22 against Iowa State, 17 of 29 against Utah State. He hasn't completed more than 58% of his passes through 3 games. And, I mean, unless Iowa is just going to put, 7 guys on the line of scrimmage at all times with, 2 tight ends, I mean, how are they going to move the ball here? I mean, they'll get their runs. They'll have some big runs. They always do. But, I mean, I don't know if I see Iowa getting more than 230, 40 yards in this game because I don't think they can pass on this Penn State defense. And I think at that point, Penn State, for the most part, can just sell out against the run. As long as Penn State's front 7 play within themselves and play fundamentally, sound, gap defense, I don't know how Iowa's going to move the ball against this Penn State defense.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, the line on this game is 39.5 for a reason. Even if, Penn State gets to 30, there's still a chance that this could be the under could still hit in this one. I can't even talk at this point.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
I think Iowa's going to at least score a touchdown. Maybe they'll get 2 touchdowns, but I find it really hard to see, like you said, how they're going to consistently put up points, especially if they're going to have to pass the ball because they're trailing.
And I'll say this: if this was a night kick in Kinnick, I would be probably saying a widely different thing, because night games in Kinnick have magic, but at the same time, whiteout atmospheres in Happy Valley. I mean, Marty brings up, and you brought up, Anthony, how the coaching staff is going to treat this game. The fans remember what happened in Iowa City. They remember all the Iowa fans. The famous guy with the shoulder, faking the shoulder injury in the stands. They remember the rat comment from Ferentz. They remember that Penn State was up 2 touchdowns when Sean Clifford got hurt and was on their way to probably blowing out that Hawkeyes team before he got hurt and ended up losing the game and really kind of just sending that entire season onto a spiral. But Penn State fans remember what happened there, and you can guarantee that Penn State fans are going to have, especially early on, a little bit more energy remembering what happened in Iowa City 2 years ago. Yeah, we'll talk more about the Iowa game on Wednesday when we preview it, but I think we all agree right now this is a game that Penn State could absolutely cover that spread, and if it's a blowout, we wouldn't be shocked at all. And then finally, just to wrap this one up, 3 weeks of Big Ten football are in the books. Who do we feel? I guess we're ranking the top 3 right now of Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, gentlemen. How would we rank them? Do we all agree that Michigan is still number 1 in the Big Ten? Has Penn State made an argument? Ohio State started off slow the first 2 weeks, but definitely looked like the Buckeyes of old this past week against Western Kentucky. Where are we in ranking the top 3 in the Big Ten? Marty, I'll start with you there. Just what's your general Big Ten thoughts? Still got Michigan on top?
I would still pick Michigan to win the Big Ten without
Sure.
a doubt. But I think through 3 weeks, you've got to say Penn State is the best resume.
Sure. 2 Power 5 wins.
Yeah, Penn State's the only one of the group that has 2 Power 5 wins. Penn State's the only one of the group that played a Power 5 team in non-con. And Penn State is just all around look the most impressive. Ohio State, their struggles with Indiana and whoever was that played last week, I apologize for forgetting, or just been well documented.
Youngstown State.
Youngstown State, yes. And then Michigan, kind of screwed around with Bowling Green. J.J. McCarthy threw 3 interceptions, 2 interceptions, whatever it was. Should have had another.
Yeah.
Didn't look great against UNLV. Didn't look great against East Carolina. So I think of the 3, Penn State's played the best thus far, has the best resume.
Yeah.
But put it this way, if I was power ranking them, Penn State easily number 1, without a doubt,
Yeah.
without a doubt. But if I'm ranking them based off who I think the best team is, I'm still going to pick Michigan. I said last year Michigan beat Ohio State. Everyone should pick Michigan to win the Big Ten at this point until they give you a reason not to moving forward. And until they give me a reason not to, I'm going to continue to pick the Wolverines to win the Big Ten. But again, if I was power ranking them, Penn State is easily number 1 of the big 3 in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think with Michigan, it's just the biggest thing is it feels like they have the least amount of holes or question marks. The wide receiver room, isn't probably that much more talented, or Penn State's wide receiver room may be more talented. But, I mean, as long as they have that offensive line, they're going to be able to run the ball decently almost any given week, which gives them a big advantage. Anthony, how do you feel about – so Marty, Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State through 3 weeks? That's how I put it right now. I
don't know. To me, it's almost like with Penn State, you got to prove it to me if I'm going to put you ahead of Ohio State. Now, again, power ranking them, I'm going Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State. But if I'm ranking them based off of how good I think the teams are, I probably still go Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State. But Ohio State and Penn State would definitely be interchangeable. But again, Penn State comes out this Saturday and curb stomps Iowa. I might revisit that, but Again, power ranking them, I'm going to go Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State. Ranking them based off of who I think the better team is of the group, I would go Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State.
And this is actually a really good week because we're going to learn a lot about two of them. And then Michigan, you know, I know it's Rutgers, but this Rutgers team has played solid football. I expect Michigan to win by, I think the spread's 23. I expect them to cover that spread. But how Michigan performs this weekend is going to be noteworthy, I think, to a degree. But Penn State has Iowa. Ohio State has Notre Dame. I expect Ohio State to win that game still, but this is a quality Notre Dame team that if Ohio State doesn't bring their A game, could absolutely beat the Buckeyes. So that'll definitely – we're going to learn a lot about Penn State, Ohio State, and probably figure out how those two teams are going to be the rest of the year this week. Anthony, how would you rank the top three in the Big Ten?
Yeah, I completely agree with Marty. On both fronts, power rankings, Penn State is definitely the best resume at the moment. In terms of the teams themselves, I'd still put it Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State until those three teams give me reason to switch that up. I was going to ask, because about that Notre Dame game, if Ohio State wins that game in any capacity, whether it's a 1-point close win or whether it's a blowout, do you switch up your power rankings? Does that vault Ohio State above Michigan in your eyes? Or is it still or is Michigan still in front until you get
power ranking them? It has to. Right?
Yeah, power ranking has to.
It has to.
The hard thing about Michigan is that, and I don't know the rest of their schedule off the top of my head, but Michigan's one of those teams that I think outside of their games against Penn State and Ohio State, so I guess till November, Michigan can just go through the motions and win each game this season by 30 points without having to do anything special. And that's what makes it hard to judge what type of team they are. Because they're not going to be tested until they show up at Beaver Stadium on, was it November 11th?
November 11th, I think.
Yeah.
I also think if you're Michigan, though, that's a dangerous position to
be
in.
It is.
When you come rolling into Beaver Stadium, when you have Penn State, who's already gone to Illinois, played Iowa, played a West Virginia team that might wind up being better than we thought, gone to the Horseshoe, that team's battle tested. You're not, and I know Michigan's got the playoff 2 years in a row, but every year teams are different. So that's not a great spot to be in either. I think to an extent we kind of saw that with Georgia on Saturday, right? Played two absolute nobody to start the year. South Carolina came out and punched them in the mouth, and it took Georgia 3 quarters to get going. And you can take 3 quarters to get going against South Carolina and be okay. You come out and get punched in the mouth at Beaver Stadium, take 3 quarters to get going, you're not winning that game. So that's definitely a tricky spot for Michigan to be in.
No, yeah. I mean, how do you react when you get punched in the mouth? I mean, we kind of saw that with Georgia, but we also saw that in Colorado, in Boulder. Colorado did not know how to react when Colorado State punched them in the mouth for the first 3 quarters of that game. And then through the grace of Jay Norvell coaching not to lose, Colorado ended up winning the game. But, I mean, I absolutely agree. It's going to be very interesting to see how that happens, that works for Michigan. And I'll also be interested to see with Michigan if, after that, if Ohio State wins this week, upcoming week against Notre Dame, depending on if both teams of Penn State or Ohio State are undefeated going in that matchup, I'll be intrigued. Does Michigan get punished in the rankings for having no tough games on their schedule? I mean, if you're Ohio State and Ohio State wins both those games, how do you not rank the Buckeyes top 5 at that point if they have wins over Notre Dame and Penn State at that point? If it's Penn State, how do you not rank Penn State higher if they have wins over a top 25 Iowa and would be top 5 Ohio State team? So it'll be very interesting. Right now I think I would go Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State, just because I feel a little bit better about Penn State overall. I think Penn State may be a better team this year than Ohio State, but I think it's also probably 2A, 2B. Any final thoughts on this episode, guys, before we get back to it on Wednesday to discuss Iowa? All right. Well, until then, everybody, thank you for listening to another episode of the Penn State 365 podcast. You can find us over at Happy Valley Insider of the Rivals Network, pennstate.rivals.com. And until next time, everybody, thank you for listening to today's episode. Enjoy the beginning of your week, and we will be back later this week to preview Penn State's White Out showdown against the Iowa Hawkeyes.